So we're seeing the ear model here, you guys, and we're going to start here with this external structure. This is called the whole ear here is called the auricle or pinna. So you can say auricle or pinna. That just basically means ear. Okay, that's kind of like the elastic cartilage part out here. Now this tube that continues deep into the temporal bone, this is called the external acoustic meatus, and it's where sound waves travel and bounce off of a structure here called the tympanic membrane. So the tympanic membrane is basically your eardrum, and it acts as a sort of like a shock absorber in the sense that sound waves will bounce off the tympanic membrane. The tympanic membrane will vibrate, and then that vibrates a series of bones here in the middle ear called the auditory ossicles. And we'll come back to those auditory ossicles here in a minute. Now, all of this as a bone is the temporal bone. In fact, this part of the temporal bone is called the petrous part of the temporal bone. Now, if I take off this piece here, it exposes what they call a bony labyrinth, which basically means like a series of cavities within the bone that house the internal ear. So all of this is the internal ear that sits in a bony labyrinth. Okay. Now, what happens is that the auditory ossicles, when they vibrate, they can transmit those vibrations onto the internal ear, which then can be sent along through the cochlea and then converted to action potentials where we perceive that as sound. So what we see here, you guys, if we look at the tympanic membrane, so this is the tympanic membrane. This bone that sits on the tympanic membrane right here is called the malleus, aka mallet. Okay? So the malleus is actually what directly attaches to the tympanic membrane. The malleus is linked up with another bone here called the incus. Now you can see these two as being separate because there's a little yellowish gold line in between the two. So this is the malleus, that's the incus. And the incus attaches to another bone, which is right here. That's the stapes. So see how it kind of looks like a little stirrup? That's what the stapes means, like a stirrup where you put your foot in if you're going to ride a horse. So if I kind of show you in a different way, it turns out that our auditory ossicles are malleus, incus, and stapes. So malleus, incus, and stapes. And these bones basically transmit vibrations from the tympanic membrane onto another structure called the oval window. And the oval window is what lies deep to the stapes here. So if you take the stapes off, there would be another sort of membrane beneath that, and that's what basically the stapes pounds on. And so the vibrations of the stapes pound on the oval window deep in here, and then that actually will pound on a little structure between my fingers called the vestibule. So this between my fingers is the vestibule of the internal ear. That contains like balance receptors as well as a fluid-filled space that extends throughout this structure called the cochlea. So all of this is the cochlea. This is involved in sound reception. Now, attached to the vestibule, all these little structures here are the semicircular ducts. Okay? Now, these semicircular ducts are fluid-filled space that are involved also with the vestibular system or balance. So when you think vestibular system, think semicircular ducts, the vestibule. So that's part of the vestibular system. The cochlea is part of the auditory system. Now, information from the inner ear is transmitted to the brain by a nerve here called the vestibulocochlear nerve. Vestibulocochlear nerve exits the temporal bone at a little hole here called the internal acoustic meatus. So the internal acoustic meatus on the temporal bone inside of the skull, the brain would be over here. The nerve exits that temporal bone towards the brain and carries that information to the brain where you can kind of receive that information that's involved in perception. Now, if we look at some other structures here, we talked about the space that is right here is called the middle ear. That's what contains your auditory ossicles. Now, the middle ear is connected to the nasopharynx or nasal cavity by a tube right here called the pharyngeotympanic tube, aka auditory tube, or also known as the eustachian tube. So this pharyngeotympanic tube, auditory tube, or eustachian tube is what connects the middle ear to the nasopharynx to equalize pressure and help drain mucus and that kind of stuff. And that's all.